Hi, Ted Chu here. I wanted to talk about two competing claims on the finances of the Ontario government, and it's about Ontario's contingency funds. So let's look at what those two claims are. One made by the government is that all $13.3 billion in COVID emergency contingency funds have been allocated. There's no money left. And then the second claim is that there's still $4 billion left in contingency funds. So who's right? Well, it turns out they're both right, but we have to look at the numbers to understand what it all means. And where you can go to look at the numbers is the third quarter finance report from the Ontario Ministry of Finance. So you look at that report, and those two claims can be verified, and you can look at them and understand what is going on. So if you look here at this line, there's a line under extraordinary contingencies and time-limited pandemic response. And you can see that there are two lines. One is for spending on the response by the health sector, and the other one is a People and Jobs Fund. Basically, it's supporting the economy through the pandemic. And the two of them add up to $13.3 billion. That's what you see in the yellow there. So those special contingency funds have been allocated. They may not have been spent because the fiscal year is not over. That ends on March 31st, but they have been spoken for. They've been allocated. And you can see just the highlight there of that figure in yellow. That's $13.3 billion in the latest financial outlook from the Ontario government. Well, let's look at this other claim that there are $4 billion in contingency funds left. And where that comes from is the Treasury Board Secretariat part of the financial report. So you look down at the operating contingency fund. It was $2.9 billion 3 months ago when there was a budget plan announced. And now it's $3.9 billion. It's been added to. And if you add that bit of capital contingency fund, basically there's $4 billion in what the finance people will call general contingency funds. So these are funds that are not allocated towards anything in particular. They could be used if the situation changes. But you should know that what often happens with government budgets is they have a contingency fund, and a lot of the time it doesn't get used because it's a contingency fund. And finance ministers like them because then the budget deficits come out a little better than expected. And so it's a bit of politics. They look a bit better than they otherwise would. So the point is there are $4 billion of general contingency funds that are still available. And what the opposition is saying is that we could spend these on other things. What could you spend it on? Well, certainly deficit reduction, but we have needs in long-term care. We have needs to help small businesses survive the pandemic. Paid sick leave will help us fight the pandemic, to help people stay at home when they are sick and could be transmitting COVID to their coworkers. And of course, class sizes, which can reduce the chance of transmission. I think that some people may want to save the money and use it to reduce the size of the deficit. But the Liberal Party has decided to say, well, look, we're still in the pandemic. We've got virus mutations in Ontario. And we've seen in other countries where that's caused an explosion in the number of cases. So we should probably be protecting ourselves. We know that there are people in long-term care who need to be protected and make sure their services aren't affected by the pandemic. We know that small businesses need protection, and they need protection probably sooner rather than later, because you could allocate money, but if it takes months for small businesses to access the money, they could go out of business in that time. Smaller class sizes can, especially in the areas where the pandemic is raging can help to reduce transmission and make the workplace safer. And we also have the fact that there are mutations, there is a lot of uncertainty, and so we should be spending money on things to make sure that the pandemic doesn't spread before the vaccine rollout completes. What the health experts are saying is that we have to deal with the mutations without relying just on the vaccine, because the vaccine is going to take a while to roll out. So the conservative position seems to be, well, we want to keep this contingency, this $4 billion, until the end of March. And what will happen if they don't spend it is it will go to reducing the deficit. The opposition, in particular the Liberal Party position, is that we're still in a pandemic. We've got the threat of the mutations, and we don't know exactly how that's going to pan out, especially with the opening that's taking place. And we should be thinking about how we can continue to protect the people of Ontario, the ones in long-term care, people who get sick and work in essential jobs where they cannot stay at home when they're sick, and they're tempted to not stay at home because very often these people are living from paycheck to paycheck, and so they're worried about losing income. Class sizes, making sure schools are safe. It's important for kids to get to school for their education, mental health, for their whole families, actually. And it's also important to make sure that small businesses survive through the closings that have to happen to control the virus. So the answer to the question is, what do we do? It's something that I think all the people in Ontario should be forming an opinion on. There are different sides to the argument, but these are, I wanted to present some of the numbers and some of the choices, and let me know what you think.